Haven Arrest Missionary Baptist Church presents Union Gospel Presses Sunday School Lesson number 7, Sunday, July 19, 2020. The lesson is entitled, Israel Demands a King. Lesson text comes from 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 11 and 18 through 20. Related scriptures are 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 22, Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 20, Judges 8, 22 through 23, Hosea 13, 4 through 11. The place is Ramah. The time is 1043 BC. One of the dangers Christians deal with is the desire to be like everyone else around them. After all, we are still human beings, and it is natural to want to fit in with our peers. However, this desire often comes in conflict with being faithful to the Lord. The desire for popularity should never overtake our zeal for the Lord. The world is never going to truly understand what makes us different as followers of Christ. But faithful Christians are going to stand out in a world that is hostile to Christ. Fitting in is going to be impossible if we want to truly be disciples of Jesus, because he and the world are moving in two totally different directions. Which direction do you want to take? The choice is yours, but there is only one wise choice. This week's lesson shows that seeking to be like everyone else is a dangerous endeavor. Today's aim, facts. To realize that it is natural but dangerous to try to fit in with the world. Principle, to learn that our desire as Christians should be to follow Jesus, not those around us. Application, to embrace God's call to be different from the world and shine like lights for him. Illustrating the lesson. People turn to governing leaders to rule over them, but God is the supreme ruler that men must ultimately submit to. Practical points. 1. Leaders must teach their children to obey God's word. 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 2. 2. Parents must discipline children who choose a lifestyle of ungodliness. Verse 3. 3. The ungodly will walk away from God's leadership in exchange for the world system of government. Verses 4 through 5. 4. Believers need to pray and seek God's perfect will for their lives. Verses 6 through 9. 5. The price of going your own way in defiance of God is ruinously high. Verse 10 through 11. 6. If it serves his purposes, God will grant our requests even when we disobey him. Verses 18 through 20. Golden text. The Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. 1 Samuel 8, 7. Today we have 4 lesson outlines. The first is reprehensible judges. 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 3. The second is request for a king. 1 Samuel 8, 4 through 6. The third is response from the Lord. 1 Samuel 8, 7 through 11. And the fourth is refusal of the people. 1 Samuel 8, 18 through 20. Introduction. Today's world has many forms of government: monarchy, democracy, dictatorship, oligarchy, and republic, to name a few. As far as the ancient world was concerned, the very idea of a democratic government was rare. Most nations were ruled by a single person, a king or queen, who was mostly an absolute ruler and answerable to no one. In short, the ruler made the rules. There are still kingdoms in the world, but most of them are constitutional monarchies, meaning that a ruler cannot exercise power despotically. Moreover, just because a government calls itself democratic does not mean that it is. Many so-called democracies and republics are actually dictatorships. From the beginning, Israel was to be a theocracy, a nation ruled by God and governed by the commandments he gave on Mount Sinai. Although God knew Israel would ask for a king, Deuteronomy 17:14-20, they were still supposed to be governed by God and his word. Introduction. Reprehensible judges. 1 Samuel 8:1. And it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Verse 2. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abihah. They were judges in Beersheba. Verse 3. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Samuel's sons. 1 Samuel 8:1-2. You may recall that Samuel's mentor Eli failed to restrain his sons, and they suffered God's judgment because of their sins. 2:12-17, 22-25, 3:11-14. In this regard, Samuel did not have a very good role model as he was being raised by Eli in the tabernacle. At this point in the narrative, Samuel was old, although we are not sure how old. Perhaps feeling that he did not have a lot of time left, he decided to appoint his sons as judges. Whether he was not thinking clearly because of his advanced age, or simply could not see what his own sons were like, is conjecture. Either way, he made a mistake by giving them positions of judicial power. Just because a person has great ability or has lived a godly life does not mean his own children will follow in his footsteps. To be sure, righteous living has a positive effect on our children, but it is no guarantee they will emulate our behavior. The problem is that the sons of great leaders, with some exceptions, are seldom great leaders themselves. Since Beersheba was the southernmost city in Israel, it has even been suggested that Samuel placed them in this faraway place because he knew of their evil proclivity and this location kept them far from most of Israelites. We know, however, that simply sending someone to another city does not change who the person is. It may even make matters worse if there are more temptations in that place. Sinful service. 1 Samuel 8:3. We have all heard the statement, money talks. Sadly, this is true in many situations, even in the legal system. To this day, there are people in power who can be bought. In some parts of the world, this is very common, making it almost impossible for a poor person to receive any justice whatsoever. The sons of Samuel turned aside after lucre, meaning they took money to make judgments in favor of the highest bidder. They knew what was right, but perverted justice for their own benefit. In this regard, they were unlike Samuel, who was a good and godly man. That they walked not in his ways indicates that Samuel had set the right example for them, but they chose a different path. They were in clear violation of the Mosaic law, Deuteronomy 16:18-20. Request for a king, verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah. Verse 5. And said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. Elders deliberate. Verse Samuel 8:4-5. The actions of Samuel's sons led to the widespread discontent. Unbeknownst to Samuel, the elders, tribal leaders of Israel, got together and decided they had had enough and wanted something done about the situation. All the elders of Israel were in unanimous agreement that their goal was clear. Ramah was Samuel's base of operation, although he traveled on a circuit judging Israel throughout his life, 7:15 through 17. He was also recognized as a prophet, 3:19 through 21. Being both a political and spiritual leader, he was the de facto leader of Israel, except in regard to his own sons. The elders pointed out two irrefutable facts to Samuel. He was old and his sons were evil. Although none of us like to admit it, age not only robs us of our physical prowess, but it may also affect our ability to make good decisions. To what degree Samuel's age affected his judicial ability is unknown. Perhaps the elders just figured the time had arrived for Samuel to retire. The larger issue was Samuel's sons. Since Samuel had a great deal of influence in Israel, the elders foresaw disastrous consequences if Samuel's sons were given complete unchecked national power. The leaders concluded that the easiest way to solve the problem was to institute a monarchy. After all, this was typical of virtually all nations, particularly those with which the Israelites were familiar. Samuel displeased, 1 Samuel 8:6. Rather than acquiescing to the desires of Israel leaders, Samuel was displeased. Literally, their request was evil in his eyes. Nearly all of us have witnessed situations where either we or others have been replaced. This happens in families where there have been a death or a divorce. It happens on jobs when longtime workers are forced to retire. It happens in churches when teachers or leaders are replaced. Obviously, there are times when it is necessary to replace people, but how this is done makes a world of difference to the one being replaced. Sadly, many otherwise good and godly pastors have been removed because a few disgruntled church members decided it was time for them to leave. To his credit, Samuel took all this to the Lord, which is precisely what we should do when we find ourselves in a similar situation. Those who live in a democracy might give or get the impression that majority rule is always right, but it is not. The majority of the Hebrew spies thought Canaan was unconquerable, but they were wrong. Numbers 13:1 through 14:10. While polls may be useful in knowing what people are thinking, polls do not determine right or wrong. Response from the Lord. Verse 7. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Verse 8. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto me. Verse 9. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Verse 10. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. Verse 11. And he said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. Rejection of God. 1 Samuel 8:7. If Samuel was hoping the Lord was going to intervene and possibly change the minds of Israel's leaders, he was greatly disappointed. The Lord, in fact, told Samuel to hearken, that is, listen to the people and grant their request. God understood what was going on. Apparently, Samuel assumed that Israel's request was a personal rejection of him and his leadership. Rather, it was a rejection of God as their king. It was a repudiation of his laws given to govern this nation. Sunday school teachers, pastors, and other church leaders may feel that those who do not attend church meetings have rejected them, and in some cases they have. But more often than not, those who fail to assemble publicly for worship and instruction reveal that they do not care enough about God and His Word to congregate with the Lord's people in the Lord's house on the Lord's day. Review of history, 1 Samuel 8:8. As the Lord spoke to Samuel, He reminded him that things had not changed in hundreds of years. After being delivered from Egyptian bondage, Israel should have been so grateful that their devotion and dedication to the Lord would have been evident, but it was not. Instead, they forsook the Lord and worshipped other gods. This was their besetting sin, Acts 7:51-53. Since this was the way things were, Samuel was to listen to the people and grant their request for an earthly king. This rejection of God's rule is mirrored in the rejection of Christ's spiritual rule at his first coming. Had he intended to be a political leader, they would have gladly enthroned him, John 6:15. But as he told Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world," 18:36. Realistic forecast, 1 Samuel 8:9-11. Although the Lord was going to permit Israel to have a king, He wanted them to know what they were getting into. The Lord told Samuel to protest solemnly unto them. This meant He was to warn them of the consequences of their decision. The people were like children who want a puppy and can see only the fun they will have and not the unpleasant task of pet ownership. Samuel dutifully shared all that the Lord told him concerning their request for a king and what it would mean for them. As with many decisions and choices, there is usually the good, the bad, and the ugly. Before making important decisions, it behooves us to weigh the pros and cons. Just because we are believers does not mean we will always make good, sensible decisions. James 4:13-17. The people probably thought anything would be better than Samuel's sons inheriting his national leadership role. However, subsequent Israel history reveals that things got worse. At this point, Samuel began detailing some of the changes a monarchy would bring about. A king would conscript some of the young men as servants and others as soldiers. 1 Samuel 8:11. In the following verses, Samuel explained that some would be put to work in the king's fields and others would spend their time making weapons of war. Verse 12. Nor would the young women be spared, as some would end up working in the royal kitchen to maintain the king's household. 4:13. The king would also seize land as he saw fit. Verse 14. And demand taxes. Verse 15. He would even take some of the people's servants and animals and use them for his own purposes. Verses 16-17. The granting of the request of the elders was going to completely alter the social structure of Israel. Up to this time, there was no system of taxation, but that was about to change. While the people could see only the benefits of having a king to rule over them, Samuel painted a bleak picture. Likewise, modern governments can operate only when they force people to do things they otherwise would not do voluntarily. To be sure, government has a legitimate role, Romans 13:1-7, but certainly everyone complains about how inefficiently their government is run and how wastefully their tax dollars are used. Refusal of the people. Verse 18. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Verse 19. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us. Verse 20, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Diminished Prayers, 1 Samuel 8:18. Because of the aforementioned realities of a monarchy, Samuel warned the people that a day was coming when they would realize the mistake of asking for a king. At that time, they would appeal to the Lord, but it would be futile to do so. As Samuel said, the Lord will not hear you in that day. Similarly, we need to be careful what we ask and pray for. The Lord might just give us our requests, and it may be something we later regret. After all, not all prayers are offered in a right spirit, nor are they all offered for the right things. James 4:3 says, ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss. Determined choice, 1 Samuel 8:19 through 20. In spite of the warnings, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They were dead set on having a king, no matter what the future held. They wanted to be like all the nations. Copying the nations around them was just going to lead them deeper into sin. For both individual Christians and churches, a desire to be like the surrounding culture is disastrous. Sadly, there are many believers who are indistinguishable from unbelievers regarding their moral viewpoints. And in some churches, if you were not told you were in a worship service, you would think you were at a rock concert. The rationale behind this is that if we are going to win the world, we must make people comfortable and use culturally relevant methods to attract them. It would actually be better to make people uncomfortable. Otherwise, they will see no need for repentance. The church must be in the world, but the world must never be in the church. The elders of Israel assumed that the yet-to-be chosen king would judge, 1 Samuel 8:20. Then, apparently concluding that he would be a just ruler, something Samuel's sons were not. The people also assumed that a king would be able to wage effective warfare against their enemies. While some ancient monarchs actually went into battle with their troops, they did not do so single-handedly. If battles were to be won, men would have been drafted into military service, something Samuel already alluded to. Previously, Israel thought they could be victorious by taking the Ark of the Covenant into battle with them, but that was a fiasco. Now they thought a king was the answer to their problems. Samuel went back to the Lord, who again told him to do as the people had requested, 1 Samuel 8:21 through 22. It would not be long before Israel's first king was selected. Although he would begin well, he would end badly, confirming the prophetic word of Samuel. Questions. 1. What did Samuel do that caused concern in Israel? 2. What was so bad about Samuel's sons? 3. What did the elders of Israel decide to do about Samuel's sons? 4. What 2 reasons did the elders give for making their request of Samuel? 5. What did the elders want Samuel to do? 6. How did Samuel feel about the elders' request? 7. Who had the people of Israel really rejected? 8. What consequences did Samuel outline for the nation if they were given a king? 9. Why would the people one day cry out to God, and what would happen when they prayed? 10. What were some of the reasons the people wanted a king? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, July 19, 2020. Thank you for listening. God bless.